our guest, Jan Roos. Now, Jan Roos is the founder of CaseFuel, and he is a pro at attorney advertising, attorney intake. He even helps attorneys with leadership training. He's also the host of the Law Firm Growth Podcast, which I had the pleasure of being on a few weeks ago. You should absolutely subscribe to this podcast. If not, have your marketing folks follow this podcast. There's tons to learn from. And he's built an incredible sales training module for attorneys that's gaining a lot of popularity. It was sort of a known secret, but now the word is out. One of the things that's been most impressive with Jan is his book, Beyond Intake. It's called 7 Steps to Growing a Law Firm on Your Own Terms. Stick around for the end. We're going to give out copies with a webinar discount code. So enough plugging. I'd like to introduce Jan. Jan, can you please share your screen, or rather start your video?
Hey, Hugo, how's it going?
Doing well. Thanks so much, Jan, for joining us today.
Yeah, super excited to talk to you guys about this stuff. I know everyone's here probably because of marketing in one way or another, but one of the super important things is to get to the actual point where you're getting a good ROI or the best ROI you possibly can comes down as much to the kind of stuff that we're going to talk about as anything else. But it's very, very easy to focus on the other stuff. But yeah, it's kind of an interesting story, which I won't bore people too much with. We can get started.
Yeah, so why don't we get into it? I'm just curious. When you talk to attorneys, they call you, they know that they need to improve their sales abilities or their sales processes. There's generally, you mentioned 3 things that they need to improve on that could substantially change everything. So why don't you lead off with that?
Yeah, super good question. So basically, we've identified, and this is why we ended up subtitling the book the way that we did. There's 7 things that need to take place with any conversation that you're having with a prospect, regardless of the practice area, regardless of where they're coming from, be it, Facebook, YouTube, Google, or, a guy's spinning a sign out front of your office. And if you can get these things figured out, you have to get them all done in a row, though. If you mess any part of the process up, you lose the lead. So basically, when we get into, and I had a conversation with a massive firm back on Tuesday, just parachuting on this. Sure as heck, there was one of these 7 steps that was out of whack. And the thing that's really interesting is that when people are classically defining things, and when we're talking about sales or whatever, there's a lot of people that limit things to the consultation room. And the truth is, if you can get a 50% increase on your consultation rate, that's absolutely going to increase your ROI by 50%. But it's also increasing 50%. You can also increase 50% in your pickup rate, in the amount of people that qualify, in the amount of people who show up to an appointment. And all this stuff amounts to the same thing as spending 50% more on your marketing. So the opportunity is to either have a higher return on investment, or get way more leverage on the amount of money that you already have, or even spending less than your competition, which is really, really exciting to me.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that when I talk to attorneys all the time, because we sell marketing services, they just want to pour more ad dollars into the system in the hopes of generating more revenue or more cases. But while that can work to some degree, it seems short-sighted, especially when sales abilities and processes aren't in place. Can you speak towards that common misconception of just ad dollars can just buy you more market share?
Yeah. So it's actually good, because this is some document, this is something I have in the book, but I think it's a really good way to kind of illustrate this visually, right? And this is just kind of the situation that a lot of people see us. Did I do that? That's sorry. I'll just take this one for now. But yeah, it's basically as a marketer, people come in when they want more cases, right? So basically, without having the knowledge of what's happening within your intake process and where you're shaping up relative to benchmark, this is basically a black box, right? So you're pouring money in, and some amount of money is coming out. This is sort of designed to be like a little trickle situation. So really, really common situation is people go, hey, we need more revenue. Let's triple the budget, right? But if it's going into the same machine that's not producing stuff, sometimes you have that same trickle. And as you can imagine, this is a super, super frustrating process. And basically, what we're trying to do by getting people trained on this stuff and aware of what's happening and what can happen and what should happen in between the person coming in and them signing as a client is we basically reveal the black box. And, nothing super crazy original here. This is, your basic funnel model, but you might realize that the reason why this flow is turning into this trickle is because we're losing a lot of people at this step and that step and this step. And again, this is just sort of a general diagram, but the three most common ones that we see is contact rate, qualification, and what we call the logistics close. But basically, if you get to the situation where you can minimize these things, and again, you're never going to get these down to 100% over time, but if you can make them as less of an offshoot as possible, then you get to the situation where everything flows. And this is really what a tuned up or just an analogy for how you're going to get a process to have a higher return on investment.
Yeah, that's okay. So yeah, it's definitely more process oriented then. How much of those leaks, if you will, have anything to do with sort of like sales 101, tonality and body language and things of that nature? Because I think a lot of attorneys, when they hear that they can close more, clients, it has a lot to do with them, but it's also more of an external conversation. So like, what if there was like a percentage weight between systems versus just, personal sales ability, where would you tip the scales?
Honestly, I think that there's more to be gained in covering the bases, especially in legal. And again, like this is like, compared to other stuff, if you were in a business that was selling like insurance or like, software or something like that, like, you're winning or losing based on competing against crazy skilled people that have tons of training. But the good news is that the bar is low enough in the legal space. I mean, as evidenced by the fact that, as an industry, we tend not even to use the word sales for fear of God knows what. But honestly, it's kind of like the old Woody Allen quote. I really think 80% of it is showing up. I'd say 19% of it is being able to implement feedback from what you're saying and keeping an open mind and looking into those things. And I really honestly think like, to get to the point where, you're a true great, it's like, you're not going to, Michael Jordan was made, but he was also born. Like I couldn't go, I'm not going to go putting up Kobe numbers personally. But, still it's like, you can get to the point where you're doing super, super well. And, considering the fact that it's mostly local competition in the legal space, with the exception of some multi-state firms, it's really, there's, more to be kind of accomplished in covering the bases than being some sort of crazy talent.
Okay. So why don't we go through those three items in more detail? Why don't we start with the first, let's call it the leaky hole.
Okay. Gotcha. So I'll kind of use this as a diagram too. So these are the actual 7 steps that we kind of go over in the book. But again, there's not really too much of like an impressive visual. But okay, so the first thing is contact rate. So there's a big issue with this, and part of this is based on where attorneys are generally coming at. So the way that I kind of characterize leads are there's really 3 ways that people can come in: a referral, some sort of an inbound phone call, and then I call it form fill lead. It can be anything, right? So it's like generally everyone's starting from referrals. And what's kind of interesting about that is that the contact rate is not really, really difficult to do. I'm sure everyone's had the situation where you've got somebody was referred to you, you were on vacation, they are on vacation, and that lead was still around when you got back to it. But if you guys have ever invested in Google AdWords, you realize that if you get that call that's missed, or you get that call that happens on the weekend or while you're on vacation, they're not going to be around when you get back 5 days later. And then the last level is if you have, again, this could be multiple ways. If you're advertising something, I mean, everyone's probably got a contact form on their website. That's someone that has even a faster rate of decay, or anyone that you end up missing on a phone call that's coming into the firm is kind of another case for that. So contact rate is the amount of people, and this is one of a lot of different equations I'll probably be going over today, but contact rate is the total amount of leads that your firm received divided by the total amount of prospects that you ended up speaking to out of those leads.
Like conversations over total inquiries.
Yeah, a real person.
A real person.
Yeah, or I guess we're when you're speaking to, right? And then like part of this, not to split hairs too finely, but like, there are going to be bad numbers, bad contacts, all that kind of stuff too. But it's how many of those leads are we actually getting in touch with? So the interesting thing is that, and a big reason why we had to develop this system to the extent that we had to is that we were dealing primarily with form fill leads. In the last 3 years, we've worked with 250 estate planning law firms. A lot of this was spurred by figuring out a way to get the seminar model online with webinars, but where we were starting at was not inbound phone calls. It was name, email, phone number. So what's kind of interesting is that basically you see all kinds of weird attributions being made. So when we have the situation where that contact rate might be lower, and I'll kind of get into how we can get that. But if we have a situation where contact rate's 50% or 25%, people start telling all kinds of stories about what didn't happen, right? So there's kind of the situation where, and this is almost like a kind of a mirror as to what you kind of have expecting going into the stuff. But like we had situations where people said, well, "Oh my God, these were all unqualified contacts." Well, how many did you speak to?
Right.
Oh, we weren't really able to get a hold of them. Okay, so were they unqualified, or did we not get a hold of them, right?
Yeah, one of the things I hear often is, Hugo, I don't want to hire a receptionist, or I don't want to hire a third-party call center because it costs too much. And when we do the math, it oftentimes costs a lot more to not have that redundancy, to not have someone answer the call 24/7. It sounds like such low-hanging fruit, but the calls add up. If you're missing one call a day, that's 20 to 30 calls you're missing per month. And if we're looking at a qualification rate of 30 to 60%, that's pretty significant right there in terms of lost opportunities. So is it safe to say that the contact rate is mostly just answering the call, like having enough resources for that redundancy, or is there more to contact rate than just answering the calls?
Yeah, this is definitely the most systems-based fix of anything they have. So
Okay.
basically, for those 3 different kinds of leads, basically what we really want to optimize, and this isn't super crazy stuff, not stuff that we've made up either. It's all about speed to lead, right?
Right.
So you want to have the availability as much as you can, because depending on where you're advertising too, there's a good chance that you're not the only law firm that's being advertised there, especially if we're talking about SEO, PPC, yellow pages, whatever, right? So having the uptime is 100% there. The other thing too is that if we get to the situation where we do miss a call, or if you're in the situation where you're getting a form fill lead, the time we want to get in place for this, and this is, there's a million different ways to potentially do it, but it all boils down to making sure we're getting a call to that person in 5 minutes or less. If you can get that, then you're pretty much going to be in contact rate with north of 80% of the people, which is insane for some people to hear because they're used to getting in touch with less than 25% for that kind of a lead.
I that 5-minute rule,
Hmm.
um, I think it still holds some weight, but I think it's 1 to 2 minutes at this point, just because it's so saturated. I don't know if you've seen that in your space, but like the consumer knows that they have options when they're looking for an
Hmm.
estate law attorney or personal injury attorney or criminal defense attorney, divorce attorney. If they're finding on Google Ads, it's super unlikely that you're the only shop that they're considering. And then they're going to consider who else is ranking on paid ads or organic. And it just feels like as Google adds more advertising real estate to the screen, to the mobile screen, to desktop, it seems like that number or that threshold for being late is just lower. It's lower and lower. It almost seems like you have to have auto dialing capabilities. Have you seen that, or is that more of a sign of desperation that the consumer can smell?
Well, I wouldn't say so much. I mean, it's like basic. Okay, so I'll say I definitely agree that the threshold's getting higher as far as like what people want. Personally, it's like you kind of have to think about where you're positioned relative to what options that the consumer has. It's like, are you in a buyer's market or a seller's market? I was on a phone call with somebody who runs, pretty well established. They do some very unique stuff within the market for like very advanced elder Medicare planning type stuff. There's not a million guys that do that in the area that
Right.
people are having. So you're not going to have all these different results. But look, if your positioning is, yeah, I'm a personal injury attorney for anything that could possibly happen to you in LA, like, good luck. I'm not going to say like you're 1 out of probably 100 results that people can have within 2 clicks. And again, if you guys have ever been in the situation where, and I like to kind of compare this to like the kind of, I mean, what it's like to hire an attorney. It's hard sometimes to kind of see the label from within the bottle, but If you ever have something emergency, right? Like, I don't know, you got a pipe that leaks in your kitchen or something like that. How long are you going to wait for somebody to call back? Are you going to hire plumbers near me, and if the person doesn't pick up, you're calling the next person? Think about it.
It's that's it. I think the consumer is less picky about credibility and branding and history. They just need someone to answer their phone call. It sounds so simple, but yeah, I think is there anything on the more system side other than just having redundant phone answering resources that plugs that hole?
Yeah. Well, I'll say this too, because this is pretty interesting. So notifications are another huge thing that not a lot of people have set up. So everyone, and like, you don't have to worry about this. And this is kind of like, it almost seems simplistic to say, but you have a built-in notification, system for any phone call that comes in. It's called the ringer, right? So we don't have to think about these things. But I want you to imagine what it would look like if you have the situation where every single time somebody fills out a form on your website, you get a text message and you call that person, or somebody fills out a chat. Because the thing is, I can guarantee you, in the moment that the person fills out that chat form, whatever it happens to be, they're thinking about you and they're looking at your face. Every minute that goes past that point, the likelihood that something's changed is going to decrease. But yeah, it's like if you literally treat the situation where your form fills are as urgent as your phone calls, then you actually, it's crazy, because a lot of people discount the value of these things. But the truth is, and this is something I kind of talk about in the book, it's like, these people have the same kind of cases that the people who are picking up the phone call do.
Yeah.
They're just not reaching out in the same way. And there's a million different ways that people could do that. But the amount of money that people can pick up that's just going into some, oh man, did you get to that guy yesterday? Oh, did you? You have like these situations. So I think notifications on those other types of phone calls, and again, also stuff like missed call, voicemail, et cetera, kind of falls in the same bucket. But the last thing too is just making sure that you have a centralized place to verify this stuff.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, there kind of gets in, I was jokingly kind of going over this example, but there's kind of a he said, she said situation where it's like, oh, shoot, I thought Jeff was going to get that. Oh, no, I thought you were going to get that. Like, so stuff like, who responds to these leads and when, and then being able to do this on your daily, weekly, whatever reviews, go into the thing. If you have a CRM that has this information, say, okay, cool. Lead went in at 124. We got a call out by 127. Badass, way to go. Or this lead came in at 124 yesterday and we haven't spoken to this person. Like, what's the deal? Changing process like that. So there's setting up the systems, but oftentimes, the bigger the firm goes, the more likely it is for these things to pop up. But I always say, trust but verify, right? You gotta make sure it's implemented.
I mean, I think there's a growing responsibility in marketing, not just to acquire the calls, but to ensure that everyone at the firm has a fair shot at talking to these prospects. That's that, and it's becoming such a bigger responsibility in marketing tech that I think it should be the new standard. I mean, for us, it's a standard. It is for you guys too. We've spoken to some of your clients. You guys have well-oiled systems to make sure that no calls are missed, to make sure people are notified, that there's redundancy. It's small tweaks, and we're talking about tweaks that take 5-10 minutes to onboard at most, and they're needle movers. So no, appreciate the detail there on contact rate, because it's something that a lot of attorneys still aren't too aware of, and it's really key there. Second point in the leaky faucet, rather, in the what's the second category than that leaky hole?
Okay, so I want to hop to qualification, and this is kind of less on, it's a metric that's difficult to talk about because it's going to shift, honestly. You have situations where your firm is going to be wanting to take anything that you can. There's situations where you got a new employee or, something like that, and you want to like lower the criteria. There's situations where you're rammed or you want to increase your average case. And like, I kind of like to, we've probably got some personal injury guys on the call here, but it's like, there's probably a time where you take a $7,500 slip and fall when you open the office. But again, you kind of move to the point where, I'm not getting for bed if it doesn't look like the damages are going to be less than 100K. And then some people, more than that, seven figures, et cetera. So it's kind of tough to keep qualification rate as a standard, but the process that we go through qualification is something that a lot of firms kind of, they leave something to be desired.
Is this qualification on the advertising side or on the intake side?
The process, and I always try to focus on what we can control. So And it's actually it's really interesting you bring up that point, Hugo, because there's kind of two sides to the story, right? So in a very similar way that there's a lot of attribution that happens to missed calls that gets to this person wasn't a fit anyways, kind of a sour grapes thing. There's a lot of situations where there's missed qualification that is process that's 100% in control of the person who's picking up the phone. But when things don't end up sticking, a lot of this gets attributed to marketing, which is not a great situation if you want to maximize the amount of return on investment you're making.
Got it. So what are typically speaking when you is this more of a training component in having better for qualification with an intake team? Like walk us through what that means on a more practical or like systemic level.
Okay, super good question. So I'll say this, and then this is just kind of my baseline recommendation for anyone that's going to be investing in online advertising. You want to have a 2-call process, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. But the major reason that, well, there's a couple different ones, but the big picture is that, these guys are finding you from the internet. It's not getting referred to you by your best friend or, some of your BNI chapter or whatever. So these guys could be time wasters. They could be energy wasters. So we want to verify that, but also in the grand scheme of things, it's going to allow you to kind of frame the conversation in a different way. So the way that I kind of break it down, and we usually use, the terms a qualification call and consultation. The qualification call is about finding out whether they're a fit for you. The consultation is whether you're a fit with them. But basically, this will typically, and it depends on the size of the firm, I think once you get to the point where you have enough volume to justify this hire, I think this makes a ton of sense from a positioning perspective and a time-saving perspective to make this somebody other than you if you're the only partner, or a partner or attorney if that ends up being the case. But yeah, we're kind of getting into the realm of like process to a little bit more of like a qualitative thing. So this becomes about scripting, and it's really, there's the ability to kind of follow something, but it's also, there's kind of levels that you can potentially do this, that we can kind of get into.
So when we're talking about content grid, just in the first point, it's about maximizing your ad dollar so that you don't lose any prospects within the funnel. It gives you more shots to talk to potential clients. So that's like the net outcome. With this second leaky hole, which is qualification, is the net outcome there, or rather the net positive there, keeping people in the system that you should be following up with? Is that the point in your case of what the value of qualifying the right way is? Or is there any other positive outcome other than just keeping qualified folks for follow-up?
Yeah. So we want to make sure that we're getting to find out whether people are qualified. We want to, theoretically, if we want to ask the same questions to everyone, whether we want to keep them or not is up to our criteria and what we want to pursue from there. But the first major objective of qualification is to keep bad people off of an attorney's calendar.
Okay.
But the second thing, and this is what gets really interesting, once we kind of get the baseline level of sorting taken care of, qualification is a huge opportunity to develop a rapport with a prospect in a way that generates momentum throughout the entire sales process. And basically what's, this is going to manifest in some really, really interesting ways. I'll say this as far as, getting people to show up. It's interesting because it's very easy to take what people say at face value. But when you have this situation, if you guys can imagine, and, I always like to try to put you in the situation with somebody else's shoes, right? Like, we go to the emergency plumber situation, right? If you have the situation where you're having somebody who's asking really specific questions about your needs, what could possibly happen, displaying empathy throughout that, you're going to schedule that appointment as soon as possible. You're going to be, getting back out of work. You're going to be getting the person a glass of water. And that's because of a relationship that started, leadership that was displayed in that moment, which is sort of a head of steam that carries you through the rest of the sales process. For attorneys, this is stuff like show rate. This is stuff like how fast they want to book, which actually does have an effect on show rate. I mean, it wasn't one of the things we're talking about, but, and then, ultimately, if you're somebody who charges packages or retainers, your ability to command a, premium price. And if you're the kind of person who works on contingency law, like the level of compliance that they're going to exhibit throughout the process. So I think it really behooves firms to take as much responsibility as possible as to the leadership that we're displaying. And all starts in this conversation if we can do it correctly.
So if it starts with scripting, and when you work with an attorney that knows that they need to do a better job as a team to qualify better potential clients on their calendar, aside from scripting, what are your tasks in improving that?
Okay. So the two biggest things that are going to show up on the call is we basically have to have, and the first one's going to sound absolutely like silly easy, but the way that people answer the phone, and especially the way that people are asking questions, if it's an outbound dial, is completely make or break. And I had this really, really funny story. So there was an attorney that we were working with in Alabama. This was during the pandemic, so it was during 2020. And this guy was, really smart. He'd super polished, had a great presentation. He's like, man, I just cannot get any of these people to get on my calendar. I don't know what the heck's happening. I'm like, you're following the script? He's like, yeah, I'm following the script. So we hop on a Zoom together, and I'll tell you guys what you, I'll go into like the positive one, but I'll tell you what he said, and we'll see whether it was a good thing. So he was calling these people up after the presentation. He goes, hey, this is attorney blah, blah, blah. Do you have any questions for me? And it's like, who's going to answer that, right? Like it sounds kind of insane. So the kind of stuff that we actually, do recommend, and I'll use an estate planning example, but this is something that you guys can generalize. Hey, this is Jan calling from the Roos Law Firm. I just saw your name come through from a webinar that you guys attended. Again, ideally, we're placing this within 5 minutes. And we actually have that offer for the discounted consultation. I'm not sure if you made it that far, but if you got a couple quick minutes, I can set that up for you. But actually, we'll stop that. So the first thing is, hey, did you? I saw you on that webinar. Does that ring a bell? Yes. Boom. We've got compliance. Next question: do you have the situation? Are you interested in booking consultation? Yes. Third thing, and this is a super important part for qualification, it really sets the tone for leadership. So once we've established the correct person, we've established the need, then what we're doing is basically creating a container that we can ask the qualifications for. So, and we're building a lot of stuff into it. So just, off the top of my head, all right, awesome. So look, basically, just to be totally upfront, there's no, crazy pitch or blah, blah, blah coming at the end of this call. I just had a couple questions about your situation to see if we'd be a fit. If it makes sense, we'll get you on the calendar with one of our attorneys, and then, you guys can move forward with, if you guys want to hire us, and there's will be the pricing, all that stuff. Does that sound good? So if they say yes to that, they're saying yes to a lot of different sub clauses, which is one, you ask the questions, they answer. Two, they're not guaranteed a consultation. This is a, mutually beneficial thing. Three, they're not speaking to attorney. They shouldn't be expecting to speak to attorney. And four, there's no point asking for price questions. So don't even bother, right? And again, they can say no to that. And then, that's kind of a situation where I'd probably look to the hook on that. Or again, that could also be the thing. If those numbers get really big, then we could have a qualification issue. But that builds in some of the most common things that we've heard from attorneys over the years. And like all these different things have been things we've built up and forward. It's so much easier to say the price isn't on this call than to come up with some crazy triple Lindy objection handle. Because, I honestly think, and this is, definitely a can of worms that we can go into it for a while. I don't like objection handling. I think objection handling is an inherently adversarial situation. So wherever possible, I like to preempt and set rules that are reasonable, get people to agree to them, and then just proceed like that.
Do you see a difference in these strategies for, let's call it, attorneys that demand a retainer fee versus those that work in contingency?
No, because it all kind of boils down to the same situation. You might have a little bit more leverage with somebody who's working with a contingency fee, but we still need to get the real win that you get out of this is compliance at the end of the day.
Got it. Interesting. All right. So by the way, we do have a Q&A function at the bottom of everyone's screen. And feel free to ask any questions there. We'll get to them at the end of the presentation here. All right. So Jan, let's get into the third leaky hole.
Okay. So the third leaky hole, and this is kind of it's a real bummer, but you have situations where you've made it through every single step. You've paid the money to generate the lead. You got somebody to pick up the phone, or you staffed up till you get to the point where you can pick up the phone, or you call them or whatever. You nailed the qualification. the person booked, the person showed, you went through a fantastic consultation, and then we don't ask for the money. So there's a lot of reasons that this ends up happening, but it's one of the most tragic things because it's, it's like, getting sacked at like fourth and inches. But it's kind of funny because I think a lot of the standards that have been set up within the profession are really setting people up to fail. And, it's the way that people are taught in law school. It's the way that people are taught in big law, where, you're basically the implied contract is, hey, I normally charge whatever, $500, $300, $1,000 for this hour. We have this weird standard in the industry where I'm just going to give you $500. You get to bug me with whatever question you want for an hour. And then if I impress you enough, you're going to agree to work with me at that fee, which is an insane deal. And it's crazy to see how many people are still operating under a model like that. And again, with the retainer stuff, just like that kind of a situation. The contingency stuff, hey, we'll move forward. So the thing is that even where that does work, it makes it very, very difficult because we've essentially put ourselves in the passenger seat and we've let the customer drive. And, whether they want to pull off onto the let's work together highway is completely up to them. It's really, really hard to be a punching bag and answer questions for a whole hour and then flip to asking questions. That question is, hey, sign this legally binding agreement and give me your money. Like it just like it doesn't really
what's the biggest gap between an attorney asking for a fee or being afraid to ask for a fee and then a potential client saying no or just ghosting them? Like, what is it? Just fear? Is it delivery?
Honestly, most people don't ask for the money, and there's a lot of situations where, the ability to ask for the money is usually based on asking questions early on. Now, that's kind of like a longer conversation, but basically we have to maintain control of the situation similarly to how we want to maintain control within the qualification. And it goes down to setting up the rules of engagement the same way in that as we do in a qualification call. And just as far as it goes, it's like, all right, awesome. So look, we've got an hour to talk about this. I'd really want to kind of go into the details of your situation. The more that you are able to share with me, the more I can make a, accurate or recommendation. And then if it makes sense from there, I'll let you know how to get started. Does that sound good? Boom. So again, we're establishing that we're asking the questions. We may or may not move forward with it. We can talk about pricing, all that stuff when it gets time to it. But that kind of puts us on the defense from people just starting to ask about, well, I was always wondering about this. And oh yeah, like my aunt ended up getting evicted. Like, what do you think about that? And like, it's crazy. But like, basically when we get to the situation, I always recommend doing a close in two parts. So if we're structuring a place where we're discovering we're the person who's in the driver's seat, we're taking the conversation, which by the way is how it should be, because you know more about their you know more about the consequences of the situation than they do. And you can't solve a problem with the mind that created it generally. But so it's going to genuinely lead to a better conversation and uncover important details, but we're developing tremendous rapport during that. We're getting more detail to their problem. The difference between somebody selling, hey, so here's the deal. I'm a divorce attorney. I'm $500 an hour. You got to put down a $5,000 minimum. Want to work together? There's no context. Yeah.
So this is, obviously people can call you and retain your services for sales, like sales abilities. But for those that can't, or for those that are looking for another way to improve that skill, because again, you've not only purchased, let's call it the advertising, you've qualified them, they've showed up on your calendars, they showed up to an appointment. Now you've got them right at the finish line and something falls flat. Frankly, that's all on you, the attorney, because you have so much of a qualification the success up to that point. Would you agree? So
yeah, this is the thing
for those that are trying to train to get better training in that regard, what are their options? Like for an attorney that's making, let's call it around 200 a year all in revenue, what are their options to improve on that sales ability?
Yeah, I think a lot of it, so unfortunately, there's not a ton that's going on within the legal space right now. I mean, that's really why I wrote the book, was because I wasn't able to find this for myself. There have been some good trainings in terms of like, I've seen some good books on intake, but a lot of it has to do with inbound calls and referral stuff specifically. But there's a couple of trainers out there, like, I want to give a shout out to, there's some great training over at these guys called The Closing Room. Those guys are good, but I run into a lot of attorneys who are going to non-attorney specialists, like, just sales gurus, like, the Grant Cardones of the world, to kind of go into this. And, not to say it's not working out for them. I know it works out for some, it works, it doesn't. But I think the super important thing is to have something to start with. I honestly think there's probably more juice in analyzing your own feedback than you could from, getting a super crazy whiz bang process. I think it's important to have a process, but I do think that the most sophisticated sales training out there, there's more that agrees with itself than not. So I think it's better to use a plan than, I think people sometimes will stress out on choosing the which, whether than just, executing really, really hard on Super One. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. So we're going to answer some questions here. The first question I see here is, if you could actually, this is for Ernest, if you could recap those 3 leaky holes. It's contact rate, qualification, and can you recap what that last category?
Yeah. I think I might have stuff a lot, but like the close rate, right?
Close rate, okay.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll just kind of have as a takeaway for that too.
Sure.
So the biggest thing is that when you've had the situation where you've gotten somebody to say yes to the solution, the next thing is you need to take control of the situation. Because if you don't have a strategy for moving forward, you default to the clients. And a very super common one we'll run into is, hey, okay, why don't you guys send me the paperwork? I'll take a look at it and I'll give you a call back. Terrible. We lose so many deals doing that. What I want to recommend instead, to go for a real strong close. For every practice area, it's going to be 3 things, right? Well, it's going to be 2 if it's contingency, but you'll say, all right, cool. So if you guys are ready to rock, here's how it's going to go. Let's set up your intake appointment right now, or whatever you want to call your fast start. All right, cool. I'm going to go over the contract super quick. I'm going to send this to you when you get a chance, and then you take a look at that, handle that before your intake appointment. Does that sound good? All right, cool. And the last thing, let's take care of payment, if it's payment. And then you want to get all 3 of those, because when you get to the situation where you have all those things set up, there's no need for a follow-up. But you don't get the follow-up objection. It's usually a sign of people not taking the initiative most of the time. People just don't ask for the money.